Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up this week with an album review as we typically do on Saturdays. Today we're looking at semi-popular band VOLA. I believe they're in the progressive rock, progressive metal area. I know they're progressive, I just don't remember how heavy they are. We've listened to them a few times, although I think primarily we've listened to tracks off of their first album, In Mazes. Today we're going to be checking out their second album, Applause of a Distant Crowd. This album is 10 tracks long, which is about normal for this channel. It's very rare for us to get anything with less or more. 10 actually seems to be a really good number. It's only 42 minutes long though, and I think most of this comes down to a majority of these tracks being on the shorter side. Most are in the 3 to 4 minute range. So, let's dive in. None of these titles look familiar. So like I said, I don't think we've heard anything from this specific album. But, I don't know, maybe something will ring a bell once we actually get into a track. We're going to kick it off with We Are Thin Air. I like that cymbal work. Oh, it's kind of gazy. Very fuzzy wall of sounds.
Lightning fell from the sky. You weren't able to step inside. Lightning was in your eyes.
Yeah. Functional drum work for the most part, really keeping the beat, but finding fun ways to do that. Putting the fun in functional, if you will. I love the bells here. Very bright and uplifting after the heavy guitar work. So that section was in 7. I think the lead up to it was either 6 or 11/8. I'm not fully sure of that yet. Massive bass tone. Okay, there's a different phrasing on the guitar and the bells or synth, whatever that is. And they're getting out of sync with each other, and the drums are choosing not to pick a side. They're kind of doing their own thing too. The poly rhythm back there on the what's that, crash cymbal? Might be a China, actually. Yeah, this chorus is really interesting because it kind of has like a 2000s electro pop feel to it. right, that's interesting. What do I make of this? I don't think I would be as, is confused the right word, maybe, with this if I didn't know who VOLA was, if I didn't have this perception in my mind. Maybe I just have the wrong perception entirely. It kind of makes me want to go back and check out a reaction to one of those In Mazes tracks. Because like I said, I remember riff heavy writing, um, progressive composition, progressive structure. I just couldn't remember how heavy it was. I think it was clean vocals though, but I mean, you can have clean vocals in progressive metal too. Um, but I kind of had them, I think, somewhere between Tool and Haken, maybe, as far as like heaviness and sound and general composition. And this was like none of that. So either I have the wrong idea of them, or they drastically changed who they were from In Mazes to this, or the handful of songs I've heard from In Mazes were not indicative of who they were at the time, and they were outliers in their sound. That's quite possible too, I suppose. I don't know how many tracks are on In Mazes, and we might have only heard one or two of them. I also think it's been a while. I recognize the album art, but I think the last time we checked out something from that might have been 2021, 2022, so it's been a while. I just remember VOLA being requested often at the beginning of this channel's life, and I feel lesser so as the channel has gone on. Maybe I've just explored all the popular ones and no one thinks about them anymore. So anyways, yeah, I'm taken off guard. I think that is my truest reaction to to this first track is sort of what? This is VOLA? And I know you all don't usually come here for like physical reactions, the jaw drops, the big eyes. We come here for analysis, but um, I think it's important to put a little bit of my reaction into it as well, a subjective component, not just in understanding the music, but also my experience with it. And that is, I think, the truest representation of this first 4 minutes is a little bit of bewilderment. Not what I was expecting at all. To get into some composition, though, some analysis here, this isn't very riff heavy at all. In fact, we had a neat little lick and ostinato at the beginning of the track, but once I think the song came in proper, we bring in the full drums, the bass guitar, the electric guitars. My first reaction was shoegaze. It's a very large, fuzzy wall of sound crafted from these instruments, and it has a very atmospheric element to it, a very hazy atmosphere. I mean, this is, to me, typical shoegaze right here. Use a lot of effects to disguise the attacks on the instrument so that you can create this constant, generally fuzzy wall of sound. It's difficult to pick out any individual instruments. It's kind of difficult to pick out even harmonic component to it. I can feel a brightness overall to the sound, but there's still some darkness in there. I don't know if this is part of chord changes or what. There's so much reverb in here that if they do change chords, there's a lot of overlap from the chord we just played still lingering on top of the chord that we are playing now. And so it is generally positive, but it has a darkness to it. Darkness might be the wrong word. Sorrow is also the wrong word, though. There's a twinge of dissatisfaction might be the way that I describe that. And this honestly doesn't change much. When we get to the verse, the guitars pick 2 or 3 notes and sort of just bounce between them in a rhythmic fashion. We move from shoegaze into rhythmic progressive metal. Djent, even. I don't think it's as groovy or hard-hitting or punchy or drop tuning as Djent typically is, but the composition of it, syncopated rhythms using two or three notes, where it's not so much the notes are important as much as the space between them. So you can have a high note and a low note. You have bum, 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 just so you can create this large syncopation with big gaps between the two hits to really accentuate or sell the movement. If you just have two notes that are like a half step apart, it's not going to feel as jarring when we have these asymmetric rhythms going on. And so we don't really have any memorable riffs here either. And when we get to the chorus, it's just chord progression. There's no riffs there. Now again, maybe I'm just totally wrong here. I was expecting some progressive metal, maybe not memorable riffage, but melodies, counterpoint to the vocals. This ends up feeling very mainstream as far as what the guitars are doing in relationship to the other parts of the song. The guitars are consistently atmospheric here. They do enter into that rhythmic groove element in the verse, but the syncopation isn't really there to get that djenty level of groove where you almost feel compelled to move your body or headbang along with the music. This is just more of a like a chin scratching, that's an interesting rhythm kind of moment. It's not groovy as far as it's just a syncopated rhythm. And that introduces an entire topic that I don't know that I'm capable of having right now. Is when does syncopated rhythm become groove? And can you create something syncopated that isn't groovy? And I think this song shows that in some capacity. But I don't know why. I don't know what that hidden component is that would have made this more groovy. I don't think it's production. If it was punchier, would it have been groovier? My gut says no. But maybe? Again, I don't have the knowledge, I think, to dig into this conversation, and I never thought I would have to. We explored groove during Groove Week, and I thought I explained myself rather well, and this completely changes my relationship to what makes something groovy. So, yeah, something to think about, I suppose, in the future. Anyways, and then that takes us to the chorus, which the relationship between the guitars just playing chords and the vocals doing what they're doing, as well as a few other things which we'll touch in a second, makes the chorus feel very poppy. And like I mentioned, it even gives me a very specific, like, Jason Mraz 2000s electropop stuff, like late 2000s, early 2010s. And that's, again, just another wild direction for this sound to go in. But the guitars consistently play atmospheric or foundational ideas, crafting an emotion. I was going to say more so than memorable ideas, but the guitars don't do, they seem to not care for memorable ideas at all. It's not even like a balancing act. It's just they do this and don't do that. And that's wild. Not because they're like the first to do it. Lots of bands do this. For some reason, it wasn't in my mind that this would be what VOLA does. I'm going to try to stop saying that, just kind of work more objectively, but it really paints a lot of my relationship to this song is my expectations, and it's going to take a second to get over that, I think. Now, outside of the guitars mostly playing chords, we do have a bass in here, and the bass tone fluctuates. At some points, it's really large and punchy. It reminds me of some really strong bass work in some of the progressive metal that we've listened to recently, even. I like that. I like the way the bass sounds in here. The bass doesn't really do anything of interest, though, much like the guitars. Their job is to create atmosphere. Sometimes they have some slightly moving lines, but most of it is just pedal tone along with what the guitar is doing. And if they're not rhythmically in line with the guitars, they're rhythmically in line with the bass kick. They play support to another instrument, basically, throughout this entire track. They get one moment in the spotlight. It kind of feels like the sound parts a little bit and the bass ramps up to fill this space that came up in the bridge, but pretty much as soon as I noticed it was happening, it was also gone, and the bass didn't really do anything of interest while having this sonic power. They sort of just came up, played a couple of notes. It was like, oh, dang, the bass sounds great, and then they went back to being support. And I don't know. Not my favorite kind of bass work, but I did like that tone, and I hope that maybe in other parts of this song, the bass gets to, or this album, the bass gets to shine a little bit. That takes us to the two most important instruments on here then. One, I think, is the drums, and that's just because they're bringing something of interest to the song. That's not to say that what the strings aren't doing, or what they are doing isn't interesting or isn't important. I find that it's not as deep to listen to analytically. I think what the bass and guitar are doing works really well from a casual perspective to just get involved in the song and have it wash over you and to really feel the emotions of what's going on. They're great for that. But digging in analytically, there's just not a lot of meat there to pick at. So we come to the drums though, and this is interesting. Like I mentioned at the beginning, the drums are definitely filling a role. Their job is to sit in the pocket, lay down that backbeat, and be that human metronome, which they do through the entire song exceptionally well. They are right there in the pocket. They're not quite perfect. It allows a little bit of human expression in there, but it's generally good enough that there's no point where it's like, oh, the drummer's dragging or they're rushing or anything like that. It's a really good showcasing of skill and dedication to a craft, and not aiming for a hyper level of perfection. But there's also all these little flourishes. None of the rhythms in here, I think, are straightforward rock beats. And I think that's what really interests me about it, is that they find a way to be that metronome, to always hit the snare on like 2 and 4 or whatever they need to do for a section, but then to also have some interesting rhythms around that using different parts of the kit, to have polyrhythm in places as well. As I mentioned, and we'll get to this in a second, the bridge was really interesting in what it was doing rhythmically, and the drums decided not to play with anyone else and to do their own polyrhythm. And I think that's really great. It shows that the drummer has a vast understanding of rhythm, not just a single counter rhythm to the general pulse of a song, but how to play an additional layer of rhythm against other differing layers of rhythms, and to create something complex that is still groovy and follow alongable. It's not a word. And it's moments like these that tell me the drummer has a lot of tricks up their sleeve. I don't really think they got a chance to show them off right here on Thin Air, but I'm pretty sure I've praised the drummer in past VOLA reactions, and yeah, they're still showing a little bit of that, even though the song sort of demands less intensity and complexity. It doesn't mean that the drummer removes any elements of unique playing, unique characteristic to how they are putting the song together. And that's what stands out to me the most. Then we get to the vocals, though. Well, dang, the vocal. Let me shift over to. Yeah, like the vocals and the synth. I kind of want to put them together, I think. These are both of our lead melody instruments. At different points of time, we'll hear one leading where the other doesn't. We have a little bit of counterpoint, I think, in the bridge. At the end of the bridge, moving back into that final chorus. But for the most part, they're alternating. And I think it ultimately works because the vocals are very pop oriented, but they're produced in a way that kind of gives them an electronic feel. It actually doesn't feel that different from the synth, and I think that's the wildest part about this. The two instruments feel very similar in timbre. And that's, I mean, one is a natural acoustic voice and the other one's a digital electric instrument. And for them to sound so close, it's kind of bizarre, but it's interesting too because it allows them to fill each other's roles really easily without the song ever shifting styles or sonic properties. The bass, the guitar, the drums, they do what they do the entire time with more or less the same tone. It creates a very similar foundation. So when two instruments are trading off at the top, that can create a sort of disjointedness to the song. So they just produced both of these to sound very similar at times. And it allows the song to have a cohesive identity despite shifting who plays melody. And I think that's interesting. I don't know if it's good or bad yet, which is going to be subjective anyways, but I do find it to be interesting in the least. Whether it turns out to be something I enjoy or not, hopefully I'll find out by the end of the album. But again, I want to come back to the chorus. I think this is the part that's the most popish to me. The verse with its syncopated rhythms in the guitar feels progressive rock / metal. It's a really meaty guitar tone, but I don't know if it's really metal enough. Maybe. I mean, it kind of fits in like a Dream Theater style of metal. Yeah, we'll call it progressive metal. This guitar tone gets reined in quite a bit. It gets thinner, more focused on the treble side of things, and we shift to just chords for this chorus. So we kind of lose a lot of that rock identity, that metal identity from the verse to soften it up in the chorus. The vocals also take on a bit more of a popish electronic sound in here, and the atmosphere of the verse, which I felt was a little bit heavier, probably due to the tone of the guitars. Really, there's not much of an atmospheric, like a chordal element here, because, like I said, the guitars are playing like 2 or 3 notes. You can't really build an atmosphere, an emotion out of that. So it's more about the way that it sounds, which feels weightier, but when we come to these chords, it's uplifting. It kind of brings us out of that. As I mentioned, there's a little bit of darkness to it. I kind of read it as a little bit of disappointment, but generally on the whole, it feels like an uplift. Maybe not uplifting, but much higher than we were previously. And the vocals feeling a bit digital here with the overproduction on them. I mean, it all comes together into something that is very poppy. It is honestly the poppiest part of the track for me, and it works, generally speaking. I don't think it's out of place here. Again, I think maybe it's just my expectations. It feels odd. I'm hoping I can get over this by the next track, now that I know what I'm in store for. But it feels like the song is of two minds, where one part it wants to be progressive metal and another side wants to be electro pop. And it doesn't really merge the two well. I think this chorus is a good enough example of bringing the two together, where it's definitely a poppy sound, but it's done so with electric guitars and bass and drum kit. And the drum kit does have some interesting flourish to it. Some very unique drum ideas, which gives it that progressive vibe. And I don't know. Maybe it does come together. It still feels weird to me, though. But I think what's even stranger is where we go from this into the bridge, which presents us the guitar and the synth doing two totally different phrases here, with different phrase lengths, which creates a lot of rhythmic cacophony going on, as one side seems to end at 4 bars in, and the other side seems to end at like 3 bars in or 5 bars in or something like that. And so this one's restarting its phrase while this one's still finishing its own up, and then they get out of sync and things get really chaotic. It's difficult to tell where beat 1 is, much less bar 1 of this entire idea. And then I don't know, about like 4 bars in, the drums, I guess they kind of feel like they have to choose a side. Who am I going to play along with? And they choose no one, and they create their own polyrhythm against this multi-phrased counterpoint, and it is bonkers. This section is actually really cool. I love it. If it were in a more traditional prog rock song, it would be a highlight to me, but as it stands, it's a bit of a confusing point. This feels like it's more in line with what the verse is pointing towards. But it even feels kind of distant from what the verse did. And it's very distant from what the chorus does. And so, sonically, all of this fits. Like I said, the production on everything is done very well to ensure that everything works well. But when I really look at what's on paper, what these sections are trying to do, how they're accomplishing that, there's very little crossover between all of it. As much as I tend to speak poorly about harsh transitions and choppy, jagged work inside of, especially a lot of prog metal. I feel like this is kind of worse, even, where it's kind of wearing a mask that makes it look like it's all one idea, but when I pull that mask off, it's a bunch of little paintings underneath that are all very different. That metaphor probably failed wildly. That is not a strong one, for sure. I don't know how to explain it. It almost feels like an anthology. I think that's what it is, right? Like watching a bunch of Twilight Zones back to back. They all have the same visual style. They all have the same sort of eerie twist towards the end of all of them. There are similarities to every episode, but there is no continuity between any of the stories. And that's what this feels like. On the surface level, what's painted on top of everything, yeah, I can see how these are linked, but what they're saying is vastly different. I don't know how to read all of that together as a whole art. I'm going to find some lyrics for this. Maybe that'll explain something to me. Maybe it won't. I've read the lyrics like 5 times now. I've read them out loud even, because that seems to be, I think, a point where I understand things better. It doesn't make any sense to me. The chorus says, I'm a lost installment in your ear. I'm the final one to interfere. In a trending picture, we are thin air. It's obviously deep in metaphor. This is very figuratively speaking, but I don't understand what we're alluding to with any of it. Both of the verses start with lightning fell from the sky. Verse 1 says, but you weren't able to step inside. Lightning dwells in your eyes. You want to hear how the blast subsides? Verse 2 says, we are impossibly grounded by all the death that you apply. How are we certain that you survived? Who is this you? Is it... Verse 1 says you weren't able to step inside the lightning, but still lightning was in your eyes. Is this power that they obtained? Is that what the lightning is, a metaphor for power? They weren't able to get it, but they still had a hunger for it. And so they left, metaphorically, a wake of death in their path as they were on a trail to get more power. I don't know that the bridge supports this, though, and I don't know how the chorus fits into that. The bridge says, reel the collar in, cultivate the sound of fur. I will praise your chin, I will shake if I'm a blur. Tossed and found, porcelain hound. Yeah, I know what all these words are. I don't understand what they mean within their own phrases. What does it mean to praise someone's chin? Like, it sounds like an old adage. Something that doesn't really make sense until someone explains, oh, this came from 50 or 60 years ago when this was commonplace, and that's where the term comes from. Like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But, like, I don't have that extra context on this. And I feel like I need a lot of extra context on this. I really hope that this isn't how the lyrics are going to go for the whole album. I can't remember if VOLA has been cryptic to me before. Maybe it always has. We're going to move on, though. Check out Ghosts, track number 2. See what goes on here. Okay, really leaning into that electropop. The distant muffled drums. I like that second synth line. Oh, it didn't really come in. Okay, I figured they'd do it again.
This roof away from me.
Oh, oh.
I'm staying here till something picks me up. Call the boy we used to see, running wild until he had to stop.
I like the vocal production too.
Those were rising high in the air. They've been hiding for so long. On these frightened eyes you have stared. They've been scared all along.
Dude, that is...
Take this, I truly believe. I'm down, but I have let the enemy shame. Some prosperous
almost sounds like there's either clipping at the bottom or maybe a digital drum kit. It could be MIDI triggering off of the main kit too.
believe me. Ghosts were rising high in the air. They've been hiding for
See what I mean about the vocals feeling very electronic though?
all these frightened eyes you have stared. They've been scared all along. Ghosts were rising high in the air. They've been hiding for so long. All these frightened eyes you have stared. They've been scared all along.
What year was this? 2018. Okay, I thought it was a lot earlier than. Okay. Dang, almost a minute-long fade out on that. Oh, almost exponential though. Okay, I don't have a lot to say on this one, but I do want to touch on it real quick because I'm starting to get a better feel for what they're doing here. I do think this is supposed to be a middle point between pop music and progressive rock. In a sense, could we call this prop music? Progressive pop? Prop rock? That's ridiculous. Oh, geez, we're gonna have Carrot Top over here doing some prop rock. Uh, that's bad. Also shows my age. I wonder how many people here are like, what's a carrot head? Carrot Top. Anyways. Alright. So I think judging by the intro and the chorus, this is very straightforward pop influenced rock music. Very different from pop rock, which tends to still hold a rock foundation and just finds more mainstream ways of presenting that sound, maybe by adjusting melodies or harmonies or even tones of instruments, making guitars sound less aggressive and drums more, well, I guess guitars more palatable and drums less aggressive. This is a completely different take on that. It's what if we made pop music with a rock band? in that the rock instruments kind of lose a lot of that rock identity. The chorus in here feels like it could be created completely digitally. There isn't really anything in here that has a strong rock characteristic to it. The vocals are very digitized, the drums are drowned out by synth and guitars. The guitars feel very soft and rounded off. They have a little bit of edge to them, but no more than the synthesizer does with its little bit of compression on itself as well. Everything here is designed to create something that feels like it could be created fully with synthesizers and electronic drum pads. It just happens to, I assume, be played with rock band instruments. And that's very interesting to me, because it is technically pop rock, but I don't think this is what anybody would think of if I said pop rock. It's just not the sound you expect. It's a very different approach to it. But I think that they're taking this sound in general and creating more progressive components on it. And that's where the verse comes in. That's where the bridge to We Are Thin Air comes in. It's moments like these that take that and push it a little bit forward. I do think that these moments feel a bit rockier, particularly the verse to Ghosts. But there's still a pop aesthetic to it. It's still a strong amount of palatability, and I don't think that this would be confused with any other rock song, but even any other pop rock song, which still has a bit of that rock edge. That's still not really present here, but at least the drums feel more full and aggressive. There is a interjection of some sort of digital drums within the drum pattern here, but at least the toms and the snare have the bite, the attack that I expect from a rock produced drum kit. On top of that, the guitars have a melody, they have a unique sound that isn't just a chord being warped into, a wall of sound behind the melody lines. And so I do get a little bit more of that rock flair here, even if it still has some of the poppier sensibilities to it. But what's interesting about the verse and the bridge to We Are Thin Air is not how they sound, but what they are doing. Particularly with Ghost, I mean, we already went over the bridge to Thin Air being full of polyrhythm and odd phrasings, but Ghost's, the rhythm in here is wild. It's really tough to follow along with. I have no idea what kind of planet the drummer comes from, but the groove there is bonkers. I love it. And oddly enough, you can still kind of move your body to it, but it is wild. I don't want to say rough, even though I do think it is kind of tough to get into. It is not something that is on the surface super groovy. You just feel it out and immediately know when to move your body or headbang along to it. It's a little obtuse, isn't it? But at the end of the day, I do think it generally works. It keeps a pulse. And that's all you really need to headbang to music is a rigid pulse, something that you can rely on being there the next time that you need to, headbang or move your body or whatever, for that beat to be there. And it has that. There's no surprises. There's no odd timings to it. That hard beat comes in every 2 beats. But what comes around that and how it tends to emphasize the ends of beats and sort of sweeping into that accent is what's awkward about it. And it almost feels like, it kind of feels like half of a Doppler, right? The Doppler effect, where sound that's distant from you sounds thinner and wider. As it gets closer, it becomes more full-bodied and present, and then the same effect happens as it leaves. But you have the speed up into the moment, and then the moment, and then that's it. That's what it feels like to me. It's almost like we're sweeping or slurring into an accent, but you can't really do that on a drum kit. And so he kind of found a sonic way to represent that. It feels like it, even though it obviously is not anything like that. It's not like I guess the best way to describe it would be like a crescendo from nothing, kind of swelling into an impact. And finding a way to represent that using toms and snares and bass kicks. It's really wild, but I think that's the end result. What I get from it is some sort of percussion analogy to that, like aerophone style of growth. And again, I'm really blown away by what the drummer is doing. It's so far, it's definitely the highlight to me on this album is all the wild ways the drummer can come up with ideas. It just kind of blows me away. But past the wild verse, and particularly just the drumming rhythm on that verse, there's nothing else that really stands out to me on an analytical level. Aside from the production, which I think here it's the most clear that we are working with a general electro pop sound. I've kind of already gone over this with the whole idea of playing electronic music with, rock instruments. Kind of wild how they're doing all this. It 100% feels like an electronic pop track from the late 2000s, though. It's kind of wild how they're doing it with one synthesizer, right? But an acoustic drum kit, normal vocals, guitar, bass, the rock setup. But they're achieving it really well, right? If we took out some of the more progressive elements and replaced them with very straightforward ideas, got rid of the rockier Djenty thing from track one, I think you could very easily have snuck this in anachronistically into some pop radio stations back at the end of the 2000s, and I don't think anybody would have really noticed that it was a rock band because they're doing such a good job of disguising that part of it. And it creates something that feels very lighthearted, very chill. I don't know if fun though. Not really fun. There is weight to a lot of the songs. It's not bouncy and energetic, even though it does capture electronics energy. And maybe that's like a rock part of it. Some of the darkness that rock likes to play with, bringing it down a bit. And kind of grounding the song despite some of the more uplifting and lighter sections to it. But I do think at the end of the day, if these two songs are indicative of the rest of the album, this is something that's best listened to casually. I think there's a lot to learn here production-wise. If you're wanting to learn how to transform a group of instruments to fit a totally different genre, this is a really good thing to study. If you're a drummer and you want to add some spice to some straightforward ideas, this drummer is someone to pay attention to for sure. But beyond that, it's a lot of chords, a lot of catchy melodies, and that's about it. And, this is the kind of music that I would like to listen to on my own, just kind of throw on in the background of doing chores or something. Not anything that I would really hone in and focus on. But that doesn't mean it's without active or critical merit either. There is a lot of cool things going on here. I just feel like they're outside of my depth. I wish I could explain how they are manipulating this rock outfit to sound like an electronic song produced by one dude with a keyboard, I can't answer those questions. I don't want to downplay how wildly creative this album is just on its sound, its sonic profile alone, but I'm the wrong person to get into that. So I do want to acknowledge that right here, just in case I forget to bring it up ever again in this reaction. I'm blown away by what they're doing here on a production level. Let's hit some lyrics on this, see what's going on with Ghosts. Alright, and this song appears to be about possibly a continuation of where we were, about somebody who had accrued a lot of power and had left, the dead in their path. But it could also have nothing to do with any of that. I don't know if this is a concept album yet or not, but we do have a narrator, a protagonist, who is against an antagonist. There is a you in here, and the you has been doing bad things. The chorus says that ghosts were rising high in the air. They've been hiding for so long. These frightened eyes that you have spared, they've been scared all along. And that shows up a lot. The structure of this, at least lyrically, is verse, chorus, chorus, chorus. There's a lot of the chorus at the end. We double up on the chorus, and then we take the Ghosts Were Rising High line over and over and over to wrap the song up during the fade out. So this concept of people cowering in fear because of you, that's really pushed into the listener's mind. Again, I see parallels to the first track, but that doesn't mean that these are connected stories in any way. The verses don't really make much sense to me, though. The first one says, "Take this roof away from me. I'm staying here till something picks me up. Call the boy we used to see, running wild until he had to stop." Given everything else on the album so far, I wonder if the being forced to stop is a metaphor for being killed, especially with the idea of ghosts being here, remnants of those who once lived, although even that could be metaphorical in that they are just, fragments of who they were at one point in their life when they were happy. Now they are metaphorically ghosts constantly hiding and having been forgotten by those around them. But the idea of I'm staying here till something picks me up actually gets carried on to verse 2. It says, "Take this sertraline relief." The annotation here says that sertraline is an antidepressant. And that could be something that picks you up from a low point. So I'm curious if that was purposefully added in verse 1 to allude to this. It says, "I'm down, but I have fled the enemy. I'll shake some preposterous belief and will steer towards immortality." I don't know what any of this means, though. It's just as cryptic as the first one, though at least the chorus makes a little bit more sense to me. But I think that my confusion between what should be read on the surface and what is metaphorical, and even within the more figurative language, finding the metaphors beneath the metaphors, is what creates a lot of the cryptic element to it. It's what makes it so difficult for me to dig down and figure out what it's trying to say. The surface level read is kind of nonsensical, but even that first layer metaphor is obscured by more layers of metaphor to a point where I don't know where to stop reading into things and start understanding what is being said. There is no stop sign that says, "Hey, this is a good place to stop digging. Maybe you should see what kind of hole you've dug now." And so I just keep digging because nothing really makes sense at any point where, I can instinctively say, okay, this is a good part to stop digging. We found a good depth. Now let's see what all this means. And that's kind of where I'm at with these two lyrics, is just kind of lost on what they're trying to say. I get the general gist of it. We definitely have the ideas of a weaker many versus a more powerful few, or maybe even a more powerful singular. But insofar what I'm supposed to understand outside of that frame, that's where I'm kind of lost on both of these tracks. With that said, I have gained some clarity about what they're doing musically. Maybe eventually, after a few more tracks, I'll have some clarity on what they're doing lyrically. Let's dive into track 3, I was going to say Smart Fiend. It's Smartfriend. Okay. Oh, okay. Very different take on the sounds. has kind of an antagonistic vibe to it. The vocals almost feel distant here, given the guitar sort of swallowing them up. The same two-note idea. We actually heard this in the post-chorus too, with a wider gap between the lowest and the highest note. If it shows up, I'll point to it again. The double accent at the end of that.
This is what you made of me. This is what you made of me.
It's interesting because this is also just guitars playing chords, but because of the eighth note dun 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 and that rising intensity, it feels totally different from the other choruses. This is the post-chorus section I was talking about with the bigger lead. Still rhythmically jagged, still jumping between two tones. Dang, that's just filthy. Dang, a long gap there too. 7 seconds to let that cymbal dissipate. Okay, so yeah, that happened. As soon as I was like, okay, I got a hold of what y'all are doing, they throw a monkey wrench into the plans. Drastic change of pace here. We still have a little bit of this poppier side, an electronic element to it. I think that especially in the second half of the chorus, once the synthesizer kicks in, this can feel a bit more like what they've been doing, but I mean, even here, I think there's a drastic difference. And I think I want to start here. Okay, so the chorus. This, I think, is the part that has the closest ties to what they've explored previously on the album. We have a pretty straightforward groove. The drums are on the simpler side of things. The guitars are doing eighth note chords. We have I guess it'd be like 8 hits per chord, which gives us 1 bar per chord. Every bar, we go up in the chord progression, and this has a rising tension to it. But it's just the guitar and bass giving us chords. We have the drums rather straightforward. We have the clean vocals giving us a solid melody on top. This is what the other tracks have done in their choruses as well, but this one feels more driven. It feels more tense. I think a lot of this comes down to the rhythm of the guitars. It's not a hazy background where the production is kind of covered up the attacks. We can feel these eighth notes in here. It has a drive to that. But also on top of that, instead of just being a traditional progression where we start with a home tone, we add a little bit of direction to it that points to high tension, that feels like it wants to be resolved, taking us to the fourth chord, which typically directs us towards home or towards that resolution again. This idea of functional harmony, where each of the chords has a specific function in direction, and that it continues to point us to the next place, increasing in intensity and then reducing it back to a resolution. This is just rising tension. It doesn't feel circular, it feels constantly growing, constantly increasing. Part of that comes in how each chord is more tense than the last, but how each chord also feels higher in pitch than the last too. It isn't a cycle, it is a rising element. And so I think the mix of the apparent rhythm of the guitars plus the shift in how the chords are configured drastically alters the way that this chord feels compared to how they have, or sorry, how the chorus feels compared to how they have written choruses in the past two tracks. That just, it's completely subversive. Honestly, like, I came into this with some expectations which aligned with what Smartfriend is doing. I think on the whole, this is what I was expecting from VOLA. For them to kick off the track with almost 10 minutes of something very different from this, with kind of nods towards this writing, particularly in the verses of the last two tracks, looking at more rhythmic guitar lines, but never really moving into this direction. They subverted my expectations from the get-go, set up new expectations, and have now subverted them for what I was originally expecting. Who do they think they are to play with my expectations like this? No, that's a joke. I mean, they're the artists. It's their job, I think, to challenge people and to challenge themselves, and I think they're doing a great job here. Again, I don't know VOLA very well, so maybe this is the oddity. And I've only gotten this sound from their other albums too, which might also be the odd song out. And so my expectations were just wrong coming in. I don't know. Maybe one of these days I should listen to all of In Mazes, and that would kind of set me up for where my expectations should have been coming into applause of a distant crowd. But none of that really matters here. I had a sound I was expecting coming in. They didn't play that. And once I got used to what they were laying down, they went to the sound I was expecting. And that, I think, is what matters right here for this reaction anyways. So yeah, playing the same kind of chorus foundationally, role-wise, structurally, but presenting it in a very different manner is what ties this to the rest. I think it is the part that feels the most of this album so far because nothing else does. The rest of the track is based around this Djenty progressive metal sound. It kind of reminds me of some early Periphery, but I definitely get a lot of Tesseract in here. It's about picking two notes, or sometimes just one note, really leaning into either this one sound or the contrast between the two sounds. As I mentioned in the post-chorus, we have a large gap between these two notes, but in the verse we have a bit of a smaller gap. They might just be a third apart, maybe even a second apart on some of the smaller gaps. And creating this rhythmic juxtaposition, not just between the two notes, but also just between all of the rhythms. There's really jagged rhythms here, a lot of dotted notes and rhythmic syncopation, which is just a fancy word for the lengths of all the notes in here are different. And so it creates something that feels very jagged, but it's all played against a backbeat. There is a rigid groove somewhere in here. I think oftentimes it's invisible too. And that there's also polyrhythm, which is only adding to things. There's often a cymbal, I think it's again the China cymbal, off on the right side of the mix that often gives us a rhythmic thing. And I think it's really easy to fall into that and say, oh, that's the quarter note. But I honestly think that that's a dotted quarter note against an invisible quarter note backbeat that isn't played but is implied through space. This is very cool. You may have noticed in a couple of places I'm nodding my head to a beat that isn't there. This is what I'm talking about. It's the implied beat because of space. That this quarter note feel is presented by what isn't played. I think you can certainly nod to what the China cymbal's doing. And I mean, you'll generally find a groove and beat there to move your body to or to headbang to or whatever. But I don't think that that's the quarter note. I don't think that that is the pulse of the time signature and tempo of the song. I do think that that is a polyrhythm against the core quarter note pulse. And so that's pretty cool too, because you have this, what is the tempo of the song? They don't really play that, but you can feel it if you know what you're looking for. But they also play a different static rhythm that is against the syncopated rhythm. And so we have this triple layered rhythm here in a lot of places. It's very wild. They do a great job of it. It sounds great. But it's not just about the rhythmic complexity to this either. We've sort of seen this, especially in the verse of We Are Thin Air, alluding to this sort of Djenty idea. What sets this, I think, further apart is tone and production and all of that. This is meaty, this is heavy, this brings a lot of that bassiness to the guitars. No longer do they have an electronic shimmer to them anymore. They no longer feel like they fit in an electronic sound as much as they are 100% metal. And the tonality of these guitars are also mixed with new harmonic elements. We're no longer looking at that kind of bright but disappointed shoegaziness of We Are Thin Air or the optimistic fluidity in Ghost with that moving synthesizer line in the chorus. We now have these low, meaty, like I said, maybe looking at a root and a third, possibly even a root and a second, which is going to add a lot of tension to these sounds. It is a darker sound playing heavier, eerier, tenser music. And the two of those combined is what gives it its metallic edge. It is eerie music with deep, meaty tones. And something that I don't really think we've seen elsewhere is an element of static, almost like a white noise or a compression that acts as a drone underneath a lot of... Well, I heard it in the intro. I think I heard it in the first verse. I wasn't really paying attention to it much by the end of the song. It might have still been there, but it removes a lot of the... I'd almost say a cleanliness. I wouldn't say that this production is sterile. It doesn't have that clinical feeling to it. It still has some grit, but I think that this is the grittiest the album has felt so far, and that's completely in the production and its use of compression and distortion in a way that we haven't seen those two parameters pushed to limits like this in the other two songs. And so we have something that feels quite a bit more antagonistic than either of the other two tracks, even though they weren't exactly, bright and poppy and happy themselves. This takes things to a very different level. And I think that wraps up what I want to say with this. I really just wanted to bring up why this feels metal, because I think we all understood that it is. I kind of wanted to dig into what about it. But also I wanted to touch on the rhythmic elements. We also had a vocal harsh there at the end. Nice little scream for, I don't know, a sentence. It didn't last very long, a few seconds. I'm curious if they're going to bring more of that into this album. I wonder if the album is going to get flipped over at this point, and the opening is going to act as an inversion of maybe the rest of the album, or if this is just an inflection point and we return to other sounds. I don't know. We'll continue to dig into the album, see where they take us. As for right now, I need to figure out what the lyrics are for Smartfriend and get confused by those as well, I suppose. And the pattern continues. I have no idea what's going on here. This dude, he writes so cryptically. This song is written in a verse, verse, chorus, chorus format. Very interesting. I don't think I've seen this at all, but it's definitely not something you see very often. The first two verses seem to apply the more general information, whereas the two choruses lean into a very specific feeling. The chorus says, "This is what you made of me, a big mistake. This is what you gave to me, another traitor." The very last line adds a failed creator to the end of that line. But those don't really mean much to me, not even in the context of the other lyrics, which I haven't even said to you yet, but there is a neat rhyming scheme to at least the end of the first verse. It says, "Though a wire has been gnawing like a mole, this is not the lie I had expected to apply when I was dragging my deformity down the hole." We have the word wire giving us that long I sound that we then follow up later with lie and apply, and mole from earlier is rhymed at the end of the stanza with hole. I like that. It's intricate, it's complex, it has a nice rhythm and groove to it, but it isn't in your face, an AABB or an ABAB rhyme scheme. It is a bit more complex than that without becoming too complex, where the rhyming is kind of lost in all of it. But I don't know what any of that means. It just sounds good to my ears. The beginning of the song says, 80 pounds of me have turned to cipher and debris in preparation of a future moving in. I was not sufficient with a low nocturnal vision and resilient but retrograding skin. Just like the other tracks, I understand the words, I just don't understand the collection of words. There is a great vocabulary here. You don't see some of these words all the time, and I appreciate that, but it's nothing that's above my level of understanding. I'm not having to go look up a dictionary to figure out what's being said here. It's just, again, the phrases don't mean much to me. Or at least not in the whole. Like, I was not sufficient with a low nocturnal vision. That's a really interesting way of seeing that, of saying that I had problems seeing things in the dark. But it gets the point across. But what does that have to do with anything else? I don't know. The second verse is just as cryptic, and at this point, I'm just expecting it. We're a third of the way done with this album, and I have not understood a single song's lyrics. It may come to a point where I just decide to skip the lyrical analysis in general. I think I still want to read them. I think there's interesting things there, but I don't think I'll have any insight into any of it, so I don't see any point in me every, 30 minutes or so saying, hey, there's lyrics here, and I don't get them. Let's dive into Ruby Pool, see what's going on. Bringing us back to that lighter, poppier sounds, while still having this wild rhythmic stuff that we saw in Smartfriends. Love hearing the bass. The panning on the piano. the wailing in the background. This is just beautiful atmosphere.
I wanna lay my head down now. I wanna turn the tide somehow.
Oh, there's two cymbals also doing really interesting things.
My head down now. I wanna turn the tide somehow. We are the
Oh, that vocal stack.
away from this tedious warm of bliss inside.
I hate that I'm focusing so much on this cymbal over here because it begins to dominate the sound a little bit.
Shining without a jewel in light.
Yeah, dude, see this, the drum work as a whole is just really fantastic. Where's the guitar in all of this?
I wanna lay my head down. I wanna turn the tide somehow. I wanna feel my face in doubt. I wanna wrap my arms around you. We are the lonely kids falling away from this tedious wall of bliss inside. We're in a ruby pool, left with a kingdom rule, shining without a jewel in light.
Oh, yeah. Nice bluesy rock solo there. Another fade out. I also noticed the two pianos haven't really changed at all. Yeah, I enjoyed that. I thought it was a really nice midpoint. It's obviously on the poppier side of things, but it's very playful. Rhythmically, it's dense in layers, not to create a collective atmosphere in that sort of wall of sound idea that we saw on the first track, but more so of a layered progressive rock idea, or maybe even layered jazz, where each layer is individual. It's not part of a unified whole, even though it is part of a larger collective, but it's also quite individual in the production of it. You can make out every single unique idea in here, and it's about how this stuff comes together to form a sum larger than the parts without becoming a singular identity, without becoming that wall of sound. And so it brings together some of the more singular identity of playing that we saw in Smartfriend with the poppier aesthetics and sound of the first two tracks. And of course, wrapping all this up inside of polyrhythm, which they consistently just do a fantastic job on. This song starts off with the two pianos. We eventually bring in the bass, the cymbals, the drum kit as a whole. They're just kind of everywhere, and it sounds great. We have this constant eighth note movement on the pianos. The bass gives us these cool little licks, 3 to 4 notes at a time, sometimes a slide in there. Ba-doo-ba-doo-boom. Just a nice little lick in the middle of this moving piano idea, and every once in a while you get another bass idea. Really cool stuff. The drums are very melodic while keeping the time going. The vocals are soothing throughout this entire track, and after we get out of the intro, we find these really tall vocal stacks with this gorgeous harmony in it. And honestly, that's kind of the whole song. There's some atmospheric sounds that show up throughout. There's always some sort of embellishing idea on a synthesizer somewhere. And I think that's very cool. Keeps the song feeling semi-fresh. We do have a couple of layer changes throughout in order to allow some sonic change. Just to kind of reduce the collective palette at times in order to create a semi-new identity in some sections, just so that the song doesn't feel identical throughout. Because right there at the end, I was like, hey, I don't think those pianos ever changed. They didn't. I think they kind of dropped out for the guitar solo, but other than that, same idea for 4 minutes. And yeah, the production and layer shifting is what helped it stay fresh for that entire runtime, even though not much changes throughout. But there is one big moment in here that I want to touch on, and that's the guitar solo. I thought this was gorgeous, very bluesy. Lots of slides in there, a very legato style of playing, which is just a softness between note changes. Staccato would be like dut dut dut. Legato would be da da da. And this on a guitar, it's just a lot of sliding along the neck rather than stopping the notes or having a really hard attack on the next pitch. Just kind of slide into it. Maybe have a really light pick just to give it some extra oomph at the beginning of that pitch. But other than that, I mean, just a very smooth type of playing. The note choices, while I don't think the music underneath changed at all. The guitar did choose to play some notes that weren't really seen in those places in other parts of the song, and it gave it a bit more of a bluesier sound. And like I said, it's just a really well done bluesy rock guitar solo, both in inflection, how it's played, and in composition, the note choices along the way. And, the song's called Ruby Pool. It does kind of feel like floating underwater. Not because it's muffled in any way, I don't think. It just feels very light. It feels very elegant. It feels loose and carefree in a way we haven't really heard. The songs prior to this, even the brighter element of track 1, were still kind of brought down by a type of weight. And of course, track 3 was just heavy and angsty. So having this massive levity that isn't just in contrast to track 3's atmosphere, but actually contrast to everything we've heard, feels really nice to allow the weight of this album to be lifted for just a moment. Yeah, I think that's it. Lightness, polyrhythms, vocal stack, dual piano, guitar solo. Yeah, touched on everything. This is a really nice song for the middle of the album. I'm curious where track 5 is going to take us, but I think that right here, the first 4 tracks, it feels really nice, condensed to what it is. If we just explore those 4, I think it has a really nice pacing throughout this opening 12 minutes or so. 16 minutes? Yeah, maybe like 17. That says some lyrics. Ruby Pool, see what's going on here. I don't know what's going on here, but there is something cool in the creation of this. In a very unusual manner, I feel like the verse is the chorus and the chorus is the verse. And that's primarily due to stereotypes of how the two sections are written. Verses tend to be a bit more linear, exploring the extents of an idea, where your chorus is usually a bit more repetitive, focusing on the point of the idea. One is your thesis. It is usually the very blunt idea of what you're talking about, and the other is more of your exploration, your supporting points. This is the opposite. Verse 1 is very repetitive. It says, I want to lay my head down now. I want to turn the tide somehow. Not only, we repeat those phrases twice before hitting the chorus. But not only is it repetitive, but it's also very direct. It explains the issue and what the person wants to do about it. They feel tired. They feel like the tide is not working for them. Most likely that they feel like they're being washed away or something along those lines. That things just aren't working out for them and they're tired and they want things to change. That's it. I want to be able to lay my head down and I want the tide to change. I want life to be different. I don't want to be exhausted all the time. Very straightforward. Verse 2 starts the same exact way, but instead of repeating those two lines, it says, I want to peel my face in doubt and wrap my arms around you. I don't really know about the peeling the face thing. Once again, some of these metaphors I don't quite understand, but I think the general idea here is still about rest. I want to wrap my arms around you. I want to be in a place where I'm happy. I'm just going to assume that peeling his face is something that would make him feel relaxed of some sort, metaphorically, and just run with that. The chorus, though, is linear, and I think expands on these ideas. It says, we are the lonely kids falling away from this tedious swarm of bliss inside. We're in a ruby pool left with a kingdom rule, shiny without a jewel in life. Once again, we have some really interesting rhyme schemes. We are the lonely kids falling away from this tedious swarm of bliss inside. Technically, the rhyme comes before the final syllable of that dual line. So I thought that was kind of cool. And then we have Ruby Pool with Kingdom Rule and Without a Jewel. We have all this interline rhyming there. The final syllables don't rhyme at all across this entire chorus. So I think it's pretty cool that there is a flow to all of it. But again, I don't really know what that means. And the outro is just, I want to lay my head down now, over and over and over, with the fade out too, which I think this is the third song maybe, to have a fade out on it. Here, at least, I think it makes sense, only because I have a cursory grasp of these lyrics. But this person feels constantly beaten down, and they just want to be able to rest. And it's an eternal feeling for them. So, like I said, the repetition of the fade out makes sense with that. All right, midway point. Alien. I was going to say Alan Shivers. I can't read today, apparently. Alien Shivers, track 5. Wait, why did I pull up YouTube? No, go away. Bring up Spotify. Thank you. Let's dive in. Ooh. Very cool production on the obviously digital drums. Maybe, it could be MIDI triggered, but it's not recordings of... Okay, I'll shut up. Yeah, very cool. Lots of movement. That bass rhythm is really cool too. vocals here being as prominent as they are. Definitely has a modern metalcore delivery to it. The piano arpeggiation over here, a little unusual for the style, but this is intriguing. I love the percussion production, it's so good. Very foggy, hazy too. There's almost like a double imaging on the vocals where the reverb is covering up the original. And it feels like it's difficult to hear it. Massive vocal stack though, very poppy.
Shivers, stalling his victory run. Drifting away as the dopamine ray of his sun appears. This confrontation, killing the perfect one.
Fun little bass kick rhythm down there at the end of that. Back to this very jagged intro. There's little hints of Phrygian in this, but they're not present enough for it to really feel like it. But in bar 7, well, I guess it'd be the end of bar 3. I was counting it too fast. There's a couple of notes there. Hey. Rewind that back. Yeah, so this is interesting. The only thing I wrote down for this one is split the difference, because that's what it feels like. We definitely have more of the metallic, Djenty sound and riffage here that we saw on Smartfriend. That comes up in the intro and the outro, in the midtro. The point between, I'm pretty sure it was the first chorus and second verse. We come back to this idea. It's super chunky, super distorted. Very aggressive sound, very bass heavy in all the instrumentation. And there's also a ton of funky rhythms going on. Once again, we have what I think is a dotted quarter note off on some China cymbal over there, maybe some sort of cymbal stack. Makes it feel very immediate. There isn't much of a trail off to it. But that's different from the rhythmic syncopation we're getting in the bass kick with the bass drum, and that's different from what the guitars are playing. And not only are the guitars playing this rhythmic idea, but they're jumping all over the place with notes. Instead of just choosing a low and a high note, there are a few high notes and a few low notes, and it feels like they're playing two simultaneous melodies, where they'll play 3 notes of a higher melody, and then 2 notes of a lower one, and then 1 note of a higher one, and then 2 of a lower one. And if you just separate the two and put all the low notes together, you'll actually get something pretty cool. Same with the high notes, but instead they've chopped it up and we're jumping back and forth between these two musical ideas. And so it feels very, very disjointed, all of it. Very cool though. Like I don't want this to seem like I'm talking down on it. It is a very cool section, but it is also very choppy, very disjointed. Intentionally, of course, in order to create what I think is an interesting juxtaposition to the rest of the song. Because the other half of the track is that electro-pop stuff. We even get rid of the acoustic drum kit entirely for an electronic drum set, which we saw a mix of, I think on track 2 was that, but we haven't really seen too much of the electric drum kit on this album. Here it takes full effect and it's highly processed, highly digitized. There's so many cool little ideas to it. Like that one hit that gets chopped up into, just like hundreds of attacks over a decaying volume. Just a very cool sound in general. And then, of course, the chorus. Once we get out of the verse, which is very atmospheric, we get to the chorus, which is just chords on a guitar and these tall vocal stacks, really poppy oriented vocal work there. Nice placement of vocals too. We have like 4 vocals in the center and then 1 off on either side for harmony, and it's just this really big vocal sound. Very popular technique for pop music. And so we get a little bit of both, not trying to combine them into one sound, but getting really heavy metal stuff and really bright poppy stuff and bouncing back and forth between the two. It's an interesting direction to take this given how the album has worked up until this point. We have tried to combine both a little bit better. I still think track 1 is the best combination of the two sounds and it feels a bit more unified, even though at the time I had mentioned it feeling a bit disjointed. Compared to where the album has gone, it's comparatively rather tame. We have seen the album, whether it's a shift from Ghost to Smartfriend or something like Alien Shivers within one song bouncing between the two extremes, there's been a large separation where I don't think track 1 had that. They were trying their best to bring the two sounds together and they're being ripped apart as the album goes on and separated. I think that's interesting. I don't know what to make of it yet, but it is very cool to hear this, what started out as one whole, an oddly mixed whole, but a whole entirely, be torn asunder and to be split into two distinct ideas to the point that one song containing both sides can't share anymore. But I also think there's something about the chorus too, and particularly even the build up into it. The pre-chorus the first time around anyways cut out a lot of the low end from the verse and kind of presented something that creates tension and energy. And so when you kind of have this this emptiness and then the little bit of rise up, some volume coming in at the bottom and the final 2 bars or 2 beats or so of the pre-chorus into that heavy hitting, everybody comes in on beat 1, the guitars, the bass, the drums, the vocals, the vocal stack, you get this really impactful beat 1 of the chorus. It's a really great feeling. The second time around kind of does this, but the verse is quite a bit thinner. It's more of an acoustic version of it. And I even was like ready to do it. I went to the big headbang and I was like, it's kind of missing, the oomph here, isn't it? I've kind of cut it down a bit. But they grew back into it later on. Anyways, it was a way of creating more sonic movements. But anyways, this idea of making a big sound, cutting it in half, and then filling that sound back up for a big impactful beginning of a chorus is something that we see a lot in modern metalcore. This is just a staple of that genre, and it's very production focused. And this got me thinking about something. Why isn't this album bigger? Because, I don't know a lot about this other band I'm going to bring up in a second. I have a very cursory knowledge of them. But this feels like it predates the modern mainstream audience's fascination with Sleep Token. I'm not going to say that that VOLA and Sleep Token are 100% analogous, but I see a lot of the same things here where we have elements of heavy progressive metal, especially focusing on production and rhythm over traditional heavy metal's focus on riffage and melody. We have one focused on production that shares a lot in common with pop and is trying to merge a pop sound and a very mainstream production element with metal instrumentation, and bringing in very pop oriented vocals, including lots of production on the vocal work, including heavy use of vocal harmonies and vocal stacks, merging that with heaviness at times, and even bringing in what I've described so far as Djenty ideas, which could be seen in a sense as a type of breakdown, though never in a bridge, always as a verse. And pairing all this together with the occasional screams, what I've described is certainly the first 5 tracks of this album, but it's also Sleep Token's MO. Now, I don't know when Sleep Token came around. I started to learn of them in 2021 ish. I think some people recommended them to me in 2020, so it could be that Sleep Token and this album from VOLA came out around the same time. They are both entering into the world of music, but regardless of if this predates Sleep Token or not, I find it wild that Sleep Token has been picked up so much from the mainstream metal world, and this album's been left to the wayside. In fact, again, as I'll mention it, I don't remember any of these songs being requested individually in any of my taking requests for the channel. So even within the community, this seems to be one of VOLA's less popular albums. I'll just put it that way to be nice. But to me, this feels like it should be really big. And maybe it's because VOLA didn't continue on in this direction. Maybe their next couple of albums return back to their prog metal roots. I know they just had an album come out this year. I haven't heard it yet, so I don't know what they're doing now. But again, I'm very confused, and it could just be something stupid like popularity and advertisement. Sleep Token, I think, is a US band, whereas this is Danish and Swedish. So maybe that has something to do with it too. They have just had a more difficult time breaking into the mainstream sound because of labels and advertising and stuff like this. Maybe they just didn't have as an aggressive of an advertisement. And again, maybe they've moved on from the sound, and when the sound finally became popular, they weren't making something like it anymore. And so it's just being ahead of the curve, something along those lines. I don't know. But like I said, this feels like it should be super popular right now. And I mean, the plays are nice. They've got about 1 million plays on each of the songs. Some of them have 2 to 3 million. It's not like they're total slouches, but I don't know. I feel like this is an album that should be thrown around all the time, and that this shouldn't be the first time I'm hearing it, because this is a sound that is very, very big right now. And I think they're doing a great job of merging the two sides of this sound, almost better than some of the other bands doing it right now. But I don't have much else to say about this one. It's a very straightforward song. It really relies on that rhythmic disjointed riff. It plays that a lot, and then the rest of it is chords. It's kind of lacking some of the ornamental layers that we've seen in other tracks in favor for that vocal stack that we saw, plus just the raw aggression in the verse. They like to keep a singular focus on that, so there's not anything fancy that sits around those. We saw the same thing on Smartfriend. They go for a simpler composition in those moments. So yeah, without anything else to add to this one, let's dive into some lyrics. I'm curious if these lyrics are, I suppose if the songs are supposed to be connected in any way. I get the feeling that they're not, but only because, honestly, I can't see much of a connection within songs, much less without. But they all seem very vague. And I think part of that comes down to the lack of lyrics. A lot of them have a simple 4-line verse and a 2 to 4 line chorus, and that's it. There's very little in the way of what's being written. There's a lot of repetition, sure, but unique ideas, it's a bit lacking in those. And so I think that adds on to the cryptic element of it. not only is it metaphor drenched in metaphor, where you got to figure out what each line's supposed to mean based on context, but you're also supposed to figure out what everything means based on a lacking of context. There's just not a lot of time to say everything that needs to be said, so they seem to focus on specific ideas, which I think creates a bit of a jarring element to it. Some stanzas even feel like four totally disconnected lines, and I think that's because it's more about the feeling of each of these lines and how those connect, more so than creating something that is on the surface fluid. And I think that's part of the way why some of these stanzas have such interesting rhyme schemes. It's a way of creating a connectivity to the lyrics that isn't really felt in the words themselves. I think a really good description of this is the chorus for Alien Shivers. This confrontation killing the perfect one, alien shivers stalling his victory run, drifting away as the dopamine ray of his sun appears. Some of those don't even make sense as a line. Much less do they make any sense with the line that comes before or after them. But there's a nice fluidity to it all. The repetition of blanking, so confrontation killing, alien shiver stalling. And then after that we have the perfect one versus his victory run. We have a very similar syllabic scheme there. And then of course the rhyme. And then we also end with sun. Drifting away as the dopamine ray of his sun appears, though. It's the, well, not the penultimate, it's the penultimate word, but it's the third to last syllable that rhymes with one and run before we bring in the finale, which we actually see a lot of that in here, where we will set up an end of line rhyme scheme and the very last rhyme of a stanza will rhyme not at the end of the line, but just prior to it, to create this feeling of almost weightlessness before a fall. Because listen to this again and tell me where you think that this stanza should end. This confrontation killing the perfect one, alien shivers stalling his victory run, drifting away as the dopamine ray of his sun appears. Right? The appears feels like it's extra, it's an extension on it. And so you kind of have the uplift of sun because you know that you have to continue the sentence, and it doesn't feel like the end, even though the rhyme scheme says it is. And it's this elements of feeling like there is more of. And this actually pops up in the music a lot, especially with the fade outs. This concept of a feeling of more. And it's baked right into the rhyme scheme of a lot of this stuff. Now, the verses seem to be about somebody close to you who is different than you, maybe has just a different perspective on things. The first verse says, "Everlasting friend, why are you so certain? Why do you defend this contagious burden? Are you still there?" Verse 2 says, "Radiant and free, eyes were sore from laughter. Now you claim to see purpose in disaster." Here we have a pretty typical ABAB rhyme scheme, free and see, laughter, disaster. Same thing happened on verse 1. Every other line rhymes. And it ends again, "Are you still here?" And that's the whole song. Somebody seems to have maybe moved on, but maybe they were always like this. It doesn't really have anything in here about change. But the protagonist, the narrator, doesn't seem to be on the same mental wavelength as the other person. Why are you so certain of this? Why do you see purpose in disaster? Why do you defend this? But he also asks, are you even here anymore? And so I have like an inkling of a feeling here. I can't grasp it. I have no idea how to tie this into the chorus because I don't know what the chorus means. There's no bridge. Like, that's all the lyrics right there. At the end of the song, we just repeat the chorus twice. I don't know what it means, though. But there is the division, isn't there? And maybe that's what the song was doing, splitting the difference. Having the heavy parts and the poppier parts. One is the perspective of the narrator, the other is the perspective of their friends. I don't have a lot of conviction behind that read, but it does line up in a way that I haven't really found any of the other lyrics to line up musically, so I want to say it just in case I'm right. Let's dive into the next track, Vertigo.
Cut it to the right size.
Very present
I'm
vocals. We haven't heard
telling you.
anything like that this album. Kind of scared me.
Your portrait is a straight line to vertigo. Kneeling in a black fire.
Beautiful
and
vibrato though.
you.
I like his voice. It's just I'm not liking the mix of it.
Walking on a glass wire without falling through. Don't be afraid of this memory.
That little bit of falsetto at the end of Afraid, so clean.
We made the greatest noise, didn't we? Won't you return to me, memory? Are you the same as you used to be?
Reverb soaked guitar, kind of bringing a little bit of that bluesy guitar tone back. I think this is only the second time we've heard this sound before. Okay, very melancholic. Interesting for a song called Vertigo. It tends to be more anxiety or tension driven when you label a song that. No. Very cool. I love this. Oh, that gets better. Oh, it's a canon. Won't you return So the left and right side, yeah, it's a canon 2 beats apart, and that's all different from the center, so it's counterpoint. A canon is counterpoint to a main melody? I was gonna let this one roll over because I didn't have a lot to say about it, but I want to talk about it while it's still in people's minds. It's too good not to. All right. So most of this is just fuzzy atmosphere. It's very hazy synth that just drones on in the background. We spent 2 minutes with a very present vocal, very low, warm, rich tone. We haven't really heard much of that at all this album, which I feel like I keep saying. it's interesting how similar all the tracks are. I wouldn't really say any of these stand out as a drastically different idea from the rest, but they're all very distinct and include unique ideas within them. So it allows each song to have an identity while still retaining a cohesive whole. It's really impressive, actually. But anyways, we have this hazy atmosphere, the vocal on top, that takes us to like almost a halfway point of the song. We have a nice little guitar solo that I thought was cool, and then we have a chime or piano or something that does texture stacking on it. They play the same thing, they just sound different. I thought that was beautiful. Nice reverby guitar with that very pinpoint precise. Like I said, it kind of sounds like a bell or a piano to me. Having the two of those sounds, one very wide and resonant, and the other one very direct and sharp, together, is a great way of having both showcasing unique elements. And it gives this, what felt very hazy and vague and foggy, to have a little bit more focus and body to it without drastically altering the sound of it. That ended up working out really well. And that takes us to the final minute, and just like, dude. So the vocals come back in. I'm like, okay, we're going to wrap this up with the vocals. They're very similar to how we started. Just a nice ABA song. I'm cool with it. And I was like, at this point, I'm just going to let the song roll over. I took some notes, enough to jog my memory. There wasn't a lot going on here. I'm like, we'll run into Still. We'll see what's going on there. I'll talk a little bit about Vertigo later. Again, it's kind of a short, direct, simple song. And then the vocal layers came in. And the first one came in felt like harmony to me. At least it starts off as harmony. They both come in at the same beat one, but then the center channel doesn't come in with I think originally just the left channel. And I'm like, okay, we got some cool counterpoint going on here. This is beautiful, loving it. Cool harmony that turns into counterpoint, and the way that they're dancing around each other and leaning back up against each other on specific beats to have these dense harmonies. It's just gorgeous. It's really well done, and there's a rhythmic component to it too, bringing in a lot of their polyrhythmic writing that they have showcased on the album. They love doing this kind of syncopated stuff, and so they're showcasing it here alongside melodic ideas. This ticks every box for me. I'm happy with it. This can't get better. It gets better though. We canonize, I don't know if that's a word, the second vocal part. And what a canon is, it's when you play the exact same thing out of phase with the original run. Most of the time you're going to see this done either a bar or two bars separated. If you've ever sung Row, Row, Row Your Boat, and when the first person says gently down the stream, somebody else starts on Row, Row, Row Your Boat, and when they start on gently down the stream, and the first person's doing merrily, 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 and now a third person comes in, Row, Row, Row Your Boat, this is a canon. It's where everybody's singing the same thing, but separated by time. And that's what happens here. There's a 2-beat differential between when the left channel sings their part and when the right channel sings their part, which is a very small difference. Like I said, usually you're working on 1 to 2 bar differences. They're just doing 2 beats. This makes things very dense, and I think it's infinitely more difficult to write, which is why they probably stuck with just having the one the second vocal on it and not a third or fourth, because then you're really having to focus on a lot of things to make it work well. To me, it's really easy to make sure that everything within a bar lines up, but now you're making sure that everything within 2 beat phrases lines up harmonically where there's no dissonance. It gets difficult to write, trust me. Regardless though, we have the center melody, we have the counterpoint, we have the canon, and I don't think I've heard this before outside of a couple rare instances in some classical music. Creating counterpoint through canon is just bonkers. And they had the guts to do it and pulled it off with style. Honestly, this sounded fantastic. I don't know if Vertigo is going to be my favorite song on the album. It is very atmospheric and singular in focus. But that ending is going to be something that sticks with me, and it's probably going to be the highlight of the album for me. They just, like, how do you top that? How do you you don't. I'm just gonna say, right, you don't top that. That was just, oh, it's made me change voices. I don't know. Let me go find some lyrics because I got nothing else to say about this. But I've just blown away. And even if I hated the whole album, which I don't, there's a lot of great stuff on here. And like I said, I'd really enjoy this casually. But even if I hated it, that minute would have made the entire 40-minute album totally worth sitting through. All right, lyrics. I think I finally get a track. Is this about dealing with grief because of the death of a loved one? The verse says, cut it to the right size. I'm telling you, your portrait is a straight line to Vertigo kneeling in a black fire and leaving you walking on a glass wire without falling through. I emphasized the phrasing like that the way I did because I think that that's the best way to feel the section, but that is absolutely not how it's written. And once again, I like to chalk that up to the really interesting and fluid writing of the lyrics. But the idea here, I think, is he says, if I look at a picture of you, it causes me vertigo. It makes it difficult for me to focus on things around me. It makes me feel like I'm really high up and in a dangerous position. He says, I kneel in black fire and it leaves you walking on a glass wire. But I think that this person's already passed. I'm not sure how to interpret the idea of the glass wire. The chorus, though, says, don't be afraid of this memory. We made the greatest noise, didn't we? Won't you return to me, memory? Are you the same as you used to be? To me, this is once again trying to deal with grief of having all these bittersweet memories, but where one's joyous moments are now tinged with sadness. Why aren't they the same as they used to be? But also a reminder, possibly from an imagined form of this other person that says, don't be afraid of the memories. They still bring joy, even if it is bittersweet now. We were great together. Remember that. The chorus brings back, or sorry, the final chorus brings back this entire thing about don't be afraid and weren't you the same and all this stuff. But underneath that, in the canon, it says this light sure is a murder. This warmth brings it further. This room leaving me perfectly still. This car parked in the driveway. This week left on a Tuesday. This room leaving me perfectly still. The idea, once again, that engaging with physical reminders in this room even could be their bedroom, could be a work room of this other person, like a, I don't know, a hobby room. Just being in it disrupts their entire mind. It hijacks their emotions, causes them to stand still. It says this light is a murder. I think that's interesting. It immediately, I assume that a specific, maybe a specific tone of light that exists that comes in through the window at a specific time of day, or a specific color of a desk lamp or something like that, immediately brings specific memories to mind and once again hijacks the emotions. Almost as if reliving these memories brings back immense heartache, as if it was a murder. Yeah, I think everything kind of comes together on this. I like the idea. It says this week left on a Tuesday, as if Tuesday might have been the day they passed, and everything after that never existed. This person walked through a stupor of life, cold and numb to everything, not recognizing the time was passing at all. The week ended on that Tuesday. It's a very heartbreaking song. I love the vocabulary used in here. And I think it matches the vibe of everything too. The guitar is very melancholic, but even the drone in the background is very numb to everything. It's not positive, it's not negative, it is. And I think that matches a lot of the vibe in here. Yep, that's good stuff. All right. Track 7. Still. Let's see what's going on here.
You're off to set the record straight, hurling down the road.
Very large, meaty, stoner rock style guitar tone.
Your doubt is heaving heavily,
but mixed with the vocal style from Vertigo.
Your will is getting old.
Something that was unique to it at the time.
Still you bother.
Was that a theremin? Off on the right?
Still you wish to be clear. Still you bother to make it disappear. You're done accepting casualties for living children.
Okay, where'd this come from?
You've seen the executioner, permitted to forgive. Still you brother. Still you wish to be clear. Still you brother. To make it disappear.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so usually it's the guitars, low note to a high note, but now it's guitars low to a synth high. Once again, bringing these two ideas, this electro synth stuff, into the realm of the metal. We still have the hazy drone in the background from the last track. Oh, another vocal. We haven't heard okay. It's interesting that it can be so large and yet feel lacking energy. It's dreary, despite all the volume. That's tough to pull off.
Still you brother. Still you wish to be clear. Still you brother. To make it.
So we're in 4/4, but that synth line in the back is not. Oh, it is, but it's not. It doesn't start on 1. Okay. We got the title track here. That's a noisy way to start this. this fun 3 here. It sounds very pleasant and light, but then you have that noisy thing in the back.
My latest meal in black and white. I kept my faith in videos of cats and shoes, and spend the day on episodes on plastic use.
Heavily produced tremolo picking.
Watch me now, I'm vanishing.
Oh, that's a fun rhythm. Tambourine? I think so. Although it kind of sounds like sleigh bells too. The contrast here between the noise in the background and everything else is wild. Nice little bass lick.
Straight to the extinction of your life.
Octave harmony's nice.
Company, go to the lost amber.
What does this remind me of, though?
Go to the lost amber. Fuel the hall straight to the extinction of your straight to the extinction. Company, go to the lost amber. Company, go to the lost amber. In the hall.
Oh, carrying the vocal melody on the synth. I like how the bass kick lines up with half of that faster guitar run. This kind of carries on with some of the dreary elements we saw on Still. Just a little bit more apparent, I think. Less of a feeling and more of a surface level emotion. Alright. I don't have a lot to say about Still. I think it was a fine song coming off of Vertigo. Nothing was going to nothing was going to reach those heights for me. So I was expecting to be not necessarily let down, but just not quite as engaged. But I think it's a straightforward, nice alt rock kind of sound. We have that super fuzzy guitar tone in there, which is a first, I think, for the track. We have some nice guitar licks. The drumming, as usual, is interesting. The bass has some cool ideas in there. Nice large tone as well. We continued on with that very close, personal vocal style from Vertigo before building it into something else, kind of returning back to the larger than life rock delivery that we had heard in pretty much all the other tracks. But I think what really stands out to me on Still is the atmosphere, more so than anything else. There is a constant hazy drone going on in the background. It kind of reminds me about Vertigo, but I don't think quite as prominent, at least not in the mix. It kind of gets lost and hidden once more the layers come in, but it's always there, I feel like. And that mixed with the emotional component, the chord progressions that are used, and even a little bit more of the shoegazy element towards the end of the track, the wall of sound that kind of leans into this drone that we kind of have going on through most of it already, it feels very dreary in a way that I don't think any of the other songs have. And I think this is an interesting turn that we're seeing here towards the end of the album. We've seen songs that are very poppy in feeling, but not necessarily in emotion. Even with some of the opening tracks like Ghost, while they are very vibrant and bright sonically, they're still very rooted and grounded emotionally. None of them feel like we're having a good time or being part of a party or that I just want to dance. They have a darkness to them. And then, of course, we have Smartfriend and Alien Shivers, which goes hard into the metallic side, and those just kind of feel angsty to me, or maybe angry might be a better word. They're very aggressive, though. And now that we've gotten past that, Vertigo really took us to a feeling of melancholy. And I think still continues on in that. It's still a really heavy, dreary sound. And that takes us into Applause of a Distant Crowd, which continues on with this. I think generally overall, there is a little bit more brightness to this, but there's a tension to it all too. I think the main melody that's passed around between like half the instruments in here. I heard a synth play it, I heard the guitar play it, I heard the vocal sing it. It's a bit more moving than we've heard in some other tracks. It's more energetic rhythmically. It also has a bit more of a brighter tinge, at least to the beginning of the melody, but it tends to take a darker color towards the end of the melody. And it's this push and pull between brightness, maybe a type of hopeful optimism, and a form of negativity, maybe following in line with the melancholy we were found in Vertigo. But all of this is played to the backdrop of, through a majority of this track, a very noisy, dissonant, out of tune guitar tone that kind of cuts through everything. It's very treble driven. It has no problem piercing through any sort of wall that the rest of the song wants to put up. And being that it's dissonant harmonically and very noisy, it acts as this a lack of, what's that word when you're fine with how things are? Complacency. It's a lack of complacency. It's internal struggle, a need for change. Maybe it's resistance, I think, is the best word for it. I don't know what it's supposed to represent, but it's present in a lot of track 8, and it feels as if it's an antagonizing force against the bittersweet push and pull that we find everywhere else. To me, it's the driving, interesting moment of this. I think Applause of a Distant Crowd has some cool ideas to it. We hear more melodic passing around. We also have counterpoint in here. We have some multiple vocal points. We had the beginnings of a canon. I thought we were going to lean into that again, and we didn't, but sort of the allusion towards one for a moment. We have more vocal harmony stacks. We have more the digitization of the vocals. That gives us more of that pop sounding aesthetic that we saw in tracks like Ghost and We Are Thin Air. But we also had more of the singular focused, forward presented, rock style vocal delivery in here too. In essence, we're really beginning to bring everything together in a way that we only sort of touched on. As I mentioned, the beginning of the album, it was like trying to force oil and water, right? Pop and metal, they were kind of working, but not really that well. Of course, as we get towards the middle of the album, it's choose. You get one or the other. And here I think we're beginning to develop a sound of both of these combined in a way that we were forcing before. It wasn't really working. It was fine, but there were obviously problems. But by this point, I really feel like this is a good song for combining their rhythmic djentiness and meatier guitar tones with poppier aesthetics and electronic driven melody. Nothing in here really feels like it's distinctly of one style or another. It actually feels like a nice combination of everything that they've been trying to put together this album. I'm curious if we're going to see a coalescing of this sound into a very perfect whole in the final 8 minutes of the album, which I do want to run together. We're going to listen to tracks 9 and 10 as one set after we get done with the lyrics of this. Because, well, primarily because track 10 is only 2 minutes long, but also because I think that that's what this album is pushing towards. This being of two minds, I think, is what this album is ultimately about, sonically, but even lyrically, the few times that I've picked up any sort of lyric coherency. It's been about trying to make two ideas that don't seem compatible, to make them work together in some way. Whether it is grief and trying to make joyful memories work with the to work with the melancholic tinge that they have taken on, or trying to understand how someone else has grown without you and trying to understand their new mindset and how to be around them. That's really all I have so far. I wish I understood the lyrics more because I feel like there's a really strong connectivity between the emotional elements of these songs and the lyrical themes. I don't necessarily think many of the individual musical elements line up too much, although I could make an argument possibly that the disjointed rhythms are about an incongruent combination, cogs that aren't perfectly lined up with one another grinding, rather than working together to drive a larger mechanism. But at the same time, those jagged grooves are really groovy and they work on a musical level and sound great. So I don't know if that read could really be supported well. But like I said, I do have this feeling that the lyrics are really important to this. I think musically, this is a fine album. There's nothing in here aside from the end of Vertigo that really stands out to me as something I would want to revisit. I think a lot of that is because it's the two things that I tend to like in music as spices, and they're used as the main components here. One is atmosphere. I love atmosphere in music, but it's not a replacement for melody. And the other thing is djenty grooves, which, as I've mentioned a lot in the past, I like djenty grooves in the larger context of works, but I don't really think it's something that can support an entire song or album. It needs, to sound like a broken record, melody to go alongside it. I think it's one of the reasons why I like Tesseract so much. Is because they tend to blend this atmosphere versus djenty grooves very well by incorporating melody and theme throughout their music too. This shows up more prominently in their later works as they, I think, have had time to mature their sound I don't think I enjoy the earlier works as much because they really do focus on, hey, we wrote a cool atmosphere, hey, we wrote a cool groove, and just bouncing back and forth between the two of those, which what this feels like, but with a more electronic element to it. And I think it's a very cool evolution of, not to discredit what VOLA is doing, but a very Tesseract sound, of half atmosphere and half rhythmic groove, and VOLA really running with that in a different direction than I think anyone's ever done before, and making it work. And I think the more important part is instilling emotion into it, which is something that I feel Djent as a whole, and even to a lesser extent, progressive metal, has a hard time employing. As you get more technical, I feel like you move away from the emotional, and it takes a really in tune artist or group to recognize where some of the technical elements can embellish on emotional components and to inject that emotion into the music. And I think VOLA is doing a fantastic job of it. Maybe it's just that I'm connecting with it a little bit better. And the lyrics to Vertigo definitely helped me connect with that song, but I'm feeling more emotional components in Still and Applause of a Distant Crowd than I did with Ghosts and Thin Air and Smartfriend and Ruby Pool, which I tended to come at and understand and appreciate from a more technical perspective. Let me dive into some lyrics on this, and then we will check out the final moments. Still is about a narrator, although it could also be a person within the story. Once again, a lot of this, I'm just realizing, is a passive viewer. Whether it is a person in a story, which I think we can pick up on songs like, is it Alien Shivers? Was the song about not understanding the other person's perspective? Yeah. Why are you so certain? Why do you defend? Yeah. So Alien Shivers definitely feels like a person talking about another person in the second person. But a lot of these songs are told from a me and you, but are particularly about the you and not the I. And I think that's interesting. In the way that it almost comes across as an album written through the second person. You know, it's not third person perspective where you have some omniscient voice that tells you what these other people are doing. This is our narrator, seemingly a person within this world, dictating what these other people are doing. There's always, every one of these songs is about a you. Very few of them are about what the narrator is doing. I think that's interesting. This one is no different. It says, "You're off to set the record straight, hurling down the road. Your mind is heaving heavily. Your will is getting old." So we have this person who wants to bring truth to light, and despite being old, or maybe getting older, says that their mind is heaving heavily. They might even be anxious about doing this. They're still going to do it anyways. The chorus says, "Still you bother. You wish to be clear. You wish to make it disappear." Verse 2 says, "You're done accepting casualties. The living should live. You've seen the executioner permitted to forgive." So you're tired of watching innocent people die, and you're ready to bring truth to light so that you can save some people. The bridge says, "Ending themes find me constantly looking through this red window. Stormy day, sweep the burst away, steer through this red water." I wonder if that's supposed to be talking about a deluge of blood, metaphorically, but having, you know, a lot of innocent blood washing the streets away. That kind of idea. And so I end up being very passive about this. I have no problem seeing the writing on the wall. He says, "The ending themes find me constantly looking through a red window." So looking at the way that things end, I'm fine just sitting here watching. And that, you know, stormy days, there's red water everywhere. That some days are worse than others when it comes to the killing of people, which again, all of this is probably metaphorical, not necessarily about the murder of people, but maybe just the abuse of, you know, of a less privileged class, and now we have somebody finally standing up for him, and it's the you in the story where the I is happy to be a bit more passive in this. But the chorus still speaks of the you in a positive way. You wish to get this cleared up. You wish to make it disappear. You want to help these people, and you do, even though you're not up for it, even though it might stress you out, even though your will is getting old. You're still going to do it anyways. And I like that. I don't know that that has a lot to line up with the song itself, which I felt was dreary and hazy. But at least I think I got these lyrics, which, that's a win for me. I'll take a little participation trophy on this one. What about the next lyrics? Huge shout out to VOLA, both the drummer and the lyricist, providing some context on this, because this is another one that I was quite a bit lost on. I'll just start with the first verse, and if you can catch what this song's about, because I think the first verse is very clear when you know what's going on. But if you don't, watch me now, I'm vanishing in the light. I photographed my latest meal in black and white. I kept my faith in videos of cats and shoes and spent a day on episodes on plastic use. I'll even give you verse 2. Watch me now, I'm vanishing in the light. I'm filtering my losing streak warm and bright. A history I've left behind high on words of all the stupidest things we said, but never heard. Yeah, this made no sense to me. I'm reading this and I'm like, videos of cats in shoes? Taking pictures of your last meal? Like, what? Vanishing in the light? What? Where's the metaphor? What is all this? There's actually not a lot of metaphor in here. Vanishing in the light is definitely a metaphor, but the others kind of aren't. It's about throwing yourself into social media. Vanishing into the light is, of course, being basked in the cold light of a screen. Says that he took a picture of his last meal in black and white. Apparently this is something people like to do on Instagram, probably maybe even Twitter. I don't know. I never really understood the point of taking pictures of your food, but I just might not have been the right audience for it. The black and white thing would have really thrown me though, but apparently that's a common filter. Kept my faith in videos of cats and shoes, just watching funny cat videos, and spent a day on episodes on plastic use, just watching random YouTube videos. Alright, that's what these are about. Verse 2 talks about leaving behind a history of words that you've said but never heard. It's throwing your thoughts into the ether of, Twitter or Facebook or whatever. The bridge flips us to the other side of this, and this is an important part. It says, straight to the extinction of your last company. This is a breakup song, or a post-breakup song anyways. It's about filling your void that you now have with mindless social media. To not think of the fact that this relationship just ended. But inevitably, you will return back to that. He says, my mind goes straight to the extinction of your last company. That is an interesting way to write it, but I think a very powerful way. As soon as I get away from these distractions, I snap back to my reality. The chorus continues that idea before ending on, when will you see me? And the outro is a repetition of that phrase over and over and over. It's about feeling lost. It's about missing what you once had. It's about trying your best to ignore it, which is never a great way to deal with emotions, but whatever. And so this song, I think, being the one that bridges the two sounds so effortlessly, is supposed to be about this. The metal side, I'm sure, represents a bit more of the fun element, if you will. It might be a stretch there, but I will say that the metal rhythms are very groovy and fun and energetic. this contrasts with the dreary, overwhelming atmosphere that we have in the rest of the song, which would be the depression, the sorrow. And the two of them are interwoven. Sometimes you can forget about one temporarily, but it's not gone. It's just pushed into the background as that noisy static sound in the background of the song is pretty much always there. Sometimes you forget it is, sometimes you ignore it, but that tension, it's just waiting for your mind to slip, to unfocus on what you're doing and hear it again. The When Will You See Me, I'm not entirely sure what that's supposed to represent. I mean, maybe, I'm posting all this on social media. Maybe you'll see how good my life is, how happy I am, and you want to get back together. But at the same time, I don't think that's it. That feels a bit superficial for this. Maybe it's accurate, though. But I do think that that's generally what this is supposed to be at, which is why it has those wild rhythmic ideas to it, which is why it has the metallic side, but also the hazy, dreary electronic portion to it. What's interesting, though, is that knowing that this song is about the end of a relationship, it doesn't line up with anything else I've kind of explored on the album. What I thought was maybe still emotionally connected in this album. Definitely not, I think, a concept album, at least not in the way that I've understood it. However, the idea of an extinction of relationship feels like death in a way that we've explored in other tracks where maybe those songs were also not about the death of a person, but the end of a relationship. It could be that we still have a lot of thematic ties across this album, but I don't think that it's a concept album. Not that I really thought it was at the beginning anyways. I kind of had a little bit of a notion, maybe. But, here I think confirmation, definitely not. Final 8 minutes. 8 minutes. Let's dive into this. We have Whaler and then Green Screen Mother. Oh, okay. Very Rule of Cool. Not rhythmically focused. It's more of groove metal than anything. Nothing like this has shown up on the album. Yeah. Putting the vocals on the same accent points, that's a brilliant idea. Oh. That was so nice. Unexpected, but such a genius part to put there. Noisy guitar work over here. Uplift. This feels like floating.
every time.
Dude, that noisy sound underneath the angelic chords. No polyrhythm here. The drums are very straightforward. Okay, finally we're bringing in some of that popular aesthetic. Once again, grittiness under clean angelic sounds. I wasn't expecting that. I kind of figured they would go into each other. Oh, that darkness. A little bit of uplift though. Like, it's definitely sad, but I think there's a positivity to it. And that darkness says a different story, but the rest of the progression.
Green screen mother, have you seen my brother? My immaculate other. This year,
The pedal tone on the left hand.
green screen mother, could we reach each other in your elegance, mother? Raphael.
See, like, there's parts of this that I want to read as acceptance, but All right. Hmm. So Whaler was interesting. We do kind of bring a poppier element at the end, and I think much like track 8, Applause of a Distant Crowd, it does a really good job of bringing the pop aesthetic that we saw quite forefront on display at the beginning of the album more in line with the metallic side. By the end of Whaler, I'd say around the 3.5 minute mark, 4 minute mark, somewhere around there, I think we see a really strong display of what poppy metal can be. The build up to that, though, is what sets Whaler apart. It's groove metal. We've kind of ditched the wild, janky, rhythmic ideas that every metallic section of this album has relied on, that gentler rhythmic stuff, in order for something that's just very rule of cool. Lots of pedal tone usage, and just a really sludgy guitar tone, which is interesting too because what was it? Still, I said, had a stoner. I think it was. I didn't make a note for it though. I think it was Still had a stoner rock, very big meaty guitar tone to it that we hadn't really heard anywhere else in the album. And so here we just have a really sludgy sound though. It's an interesting decision to do so late in the album, but one that I think is supported by their general. It's not a reluctance. It's a general want to continue to evolve their sound. Once again, there isn't a single song in this album that feels out of place. And I think a lot of that comes down to production, but there's so much nuance in how they go and approach the poppy sound, how much nuance they have into their metallic sound, and the plethora of ways that they meet in the middle, that they're allowed the sonic experimentation of changing how they go about doing some of these things, bringing in wildly different approaches to it at the end of the album without ever losing that connectivity, without losing that sense of self as far as the album's sonic presence goes. In a way that, despite how different Whaler sounds and how it draws from a very different metallic element, that it still ends up feeling very much like this album is. I find that to be very interesting and something that I would listen to the album for again, especially knowing where it goes and how it develops and what it turns into, listening from the very beginning, knowing how much of a chameleon it's going to be, and being able to appreciate and maybe hear how those things come together. I've picked up a lot of the compositional side of things, but I would love to listen more, kind of focus on the production side of things and see if anything's going on there that helps to smooth over some of these rough edges as they are piecing these ideas together in a way that doesn't feel as jarring as I think they could be in another producer's hands, or maybe even another band's hands. But I don't think I have much to say about Whaler other than that. It is, once again, another song that starts off heavy and shifts into the more poppy side. There's a lot of cool layers in here, some wild rhythmic things. Once again, we use noisy elements to juxtapose brighter, cleaner sounds. We saw this on Still, we saw it on Applause of a Distant Crowd. We're seeing it here on Whaler, particularly in the bridge, where we just have this noisy stuff going on over here, and then there's the bells or the chimes or something in the center, giving us this very bright, clean sound. I think that Whaler also gives us our densest song as far as layers go, not just harmonic stacks, but moving parts on top of that. It is a really nice collection of everything. I wouldn't say that this is a song that showcases everything the album does, but I do think it brings a little bit of everything and turns it into its own way, so that it does feel like a cohesive finale, tying up loose ends and all that stuff musically while still being its own unique song. That's, again, a really fine line to walk, and somehow VOLA does it with ease, it seems like. All of this takes us to Green Screen Mother, which I don't. I suppose it's a fine final moment of the song. I still think maybe not lyrically, maybe the division is necessary there, but I would kind of wish it was just the final 2 minutes of Whaler, bringing the energy down. We already had the fade out, we had a little bit of the piano work there. It would have been cool just to tie them together and have this not be its own track, primarily because I don't think it stands too well as its own track. It is self-contained, but it's also singular in vision, and it doesn't really carry a lot of what the album's doing. However, it does have a duality of sound to it. It is a little optimistic while also carrying elements of darkness and tension and sorrow. And this is what this album's been doing phenomenally as far as atmosphere and emotion go, is trying to walk this line of being better tomorrow than you are today, and doing so in the face of hardships. That seems to be the general theme of this album, though again, kind of iffy on some of that. But this album's done a great job of that, and I think this emotionally and chord progression wise, this last track lands on that. Maybe the whole track thing is a stupid thing. Most people, if they're going to listen all the way through, they're just going to let this last track run anyways. It's not going to change the end result. It's just the way that I listen to things this way, that I view it as a unique track and thus a unique idea. And I don't know that it stands so well like that. I do wish I had more to talk about here, though. I say that Whaler and Green Screen Mother have unique elements to them that help them stand out, that they're not just more of the same, but I didn't really have much to bring up on that. And I think it's more of a gut feeling, possibly. Because on the surface level, I mean, Green Screen Mother is obviously a bit different. It's more like Vertigo, piano and vocals. But Whaler, it's pop and metal. That's something we've explored this whole time, but there are unique elements to it. And I'm listening to it, I'm like, oh, we've never heard that before. But I can't remember what they were. I don't know. Let me hit some lyrics on these last two, and we're going to wrap this video up. Alright. Now, I didn't quite catch the musical structure of this, but lyrically, we have verse, verse, chorus, bridge, bridge, chorus. Between the bridges is an instrumental part. I think this is pretty interesting. The second bridge does modify the first one a little bit, so we get an expansion of the idea, and the final chorus is just the first chorus said twice. The verses are just 2 lines long, though. Verse 1 says, glitch in my hand, I'm determined to withstand, cause overgrown, infiltrating baritone. I have no idea what any of that means. And verse 2 says, black mountain dew from my temper, for my truth, tall apogee, I'm assembled finally. And again, that means not much to me. Now, the annotation from the guitarist and songwriter and singer has stated, the song is about the fear of how you will be remembered. Not really sure how that lines up with anything. The chorus kind of dips into that direction, but I feel I can't really view that as the definitive way I understand the chorus. It says, save the part you wrote. I want to escape night. All my emptiness should wither in famed light. Save the part below my dissolving eyes and bones. This is the grand borderline. I'm losing my grip every time. And I kind of get the idea of putting yourself out there. Your emptiness, your emotion, your negativity, everything that makes you who you are. Turning it into art and putting it into the spotlight. And kind of feeling bad about that. Maybe wanting more out of your art. Maybe not wanting to have to expose yourself and make you so vulnerable for your art. But I'm really grasping at straws in order to make that parallel between what they say it's about and what I'm reading. So I don't know. Even with the help of what their intentions were, I have a bit of a rough time with it. Now, Green Screen Mother is just 8 lines. It says, Green Screen Mother, have you seen my brother, my immaculate other this year? Green Screen Mother, could we reach each other in your elegant smother of fear? I have no idea what this is supposed to be about. I really, I don't know what a green screen mother is. One that you superimpose on a different situation, maybe, would be the interpretation of that. I don't know, man. It says, could we reach each other in your elegant smother of fear? Is there a way that we could hug each other? To be in each other's embrace? But while mine would I think he's asking for comfort here. And the idea, though, is that anything that she brings would be of fear. But I don't know what that might have to do with seeing his brother named the Immaculate Other. Maybe his brother was always the one that never got in trouble, the one that always did everything right. Maybe they've gone missing. Maybe they've just done something really great. I don't know. I don't know. 2 out of 10, I think, is what I got for lyrics on this one, which is probably one of my worst ones. They speak in such a flowery, poetic way, and it can go over my head. Sometimes it's really gorgeous, though. I love the way it flows, the way it sounds. Even if I don't get it, I can still feel it sometimes. But I do have a tough time digging in, trying to figure out what they're talking about. So, I guess this is where we end this video. These are my thoughts. VOLA's applause of a distant crowd. What are yours, though? Did you enjoy this? Is there anything in here that stood out to you that maybe I didn't touch on? Maybe some stuff that I didn't touch on enough you want to expand on? Maybe you have a totally different take on things. Maybe I was completely wrong and you need to correct me. Let me know about any of that. Put it down in the comment section. If you have any interpretations of these lyrics, please let me know. I really enjoy the music. I enjoy the atmosphere that they're building. I'd love to get that last piece into place to really get this album. So, yeah, put that down in the comments too if you have interpretations of anything, even just a single stanza that might have stood out to you, that might help me put some stuff into place. Just anything, let me know. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all 3 of those. Alright, that wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. UTC. We're going to do a live stream. We hang out for 2 hours, chit-chat, listen to some cool music. It's very chill, very laid back. And, if you ask most people who show up, also very fun. So if you can make it, I highly suggest it. It's a blast. Otherwise, though, Monday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, as always, 10 p.m. UTC, we're going to progress on with next week's theme, which I think is classic music. Anything that came out before the turn of the century. Alright, until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.